Clarity by Dragon Sin, Chapter 5, again, Part 2.
Think it would have been them of all people to interfere, Namekuji muttered contemplatively, rubbing her fist in thought more than sourness as she and her team stood on the rooftop far away from the screaming sirens and forlorn wails. The frustration between the three of them was palpable, more than the smoke slowly rising in the distance. They had failed the mission. There was no way they could whitewash it, no other way to spin things to rationalize it. They also knew exactly where the council would attempt to put the blame, and that in turn made them want to blame themselves all the more, even if they had followed his orders to the letter, to place it all on his shoulders. We failed. Taka scowled, looking for something to cut to alleviate the burning feeling of uselessness. But the information we received was faulty. Iroh argued rationally but weakly. That doesn't matter to them when we're involved. His raven-haired teammate retorted dismally, at last settling for just kicking a rotating air vent that had rusted long ago. But the huntsman team he hired was handled by Shiva. He interrupted before his social inept teammate could further irate him. They'll come at us for not taking one girl out. The rules say we can't harm civilians. Behind her mask, Namikuji was biting her lips plaintively, but I doubt that will help our situation. This is Jin's doing, Taka growled, his grip tightening on his sword as he contemplatively used it again. For the past few missions, we haven't been receiving enough information to act properly. As it is, this mission had way too many holes in it from the beginning, which probably only makes it easier for the snake to cover his tracks. This is bullshit, the one female on the team growled. It doesn't matter. The trio turned to look at their leader as he held his mask in his hand. There were a few cracks in it. He would need to get a new one. The mission is a failure, he stated. There was never any beating around the bush with him, only the straightest path to success. Plain and simple. But Namekuji interjected, but stopped because at the end of the day, that was true. We simply cannot fail again. We didn't fail in the least, uh, Taka countered, not willing to let their leader assume responsibility on this one, not willing to let him disparage the team either. One is enough, Kitchen stated. Something with his team was lit at that statement. They just didn't disagree with him. What about the girl? Curiosity got the better of Iroh and he asked. That's the second time we've run into her. Kitsune was silent for a moment as a pair of silver eyes flashed through his mind. You think it's coincidence? There was the misfortune of their missions, which could be tracked to a specific individual, and then there was the pervasive bad luck which had dogged him for his entire life. It was so much easier to feel nothing than to feel each transgression levied against him and what he tried to accomplish. Every nick, cut, scrape, gash, slash, and blow was nothing compared to the knowledge that no matter what he did, it wasn't good enough. If she thought she was better, he would prove her wrong. It had been confirmed that they are indeed huntsmen in training and no longer prospects. The blonde judged with the detachment of an executioner as he stood up and began to retrace the way to the rendezvous. This means they are no longer civilians in our eyes. His eyes waited a bit before they followed in silence. There was nothing to say and nothing they could say to their obviously perturbed leader. His behavior was strange enough, removing his mask in the field. There was also the unspoken hidden cues which only they had learned to read, like the screenplay of the tragedy which was Naruto Uzumaki. Things had changed, and this pronouncement only confirmed it. But alas, it also took matters out of their hands. Clarity. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? I'll demolish all of them. Yang, for the 11th time, I'm fine, Ruby huffed as her sister checked her over once again. They were standing just outside the alley while the professional huntsmen surrounded the area that was being cordoned off by police. Well, that's good to hear, Blake added as she watched the two sisters' antics with amusement. Honestly, can't you stay out of trouble? In contrast, Weiss regarded the same scene with irritation, though Blake could see the relief in her eyes, and knew she was glad that the younger girl hadn't been hurt too bad. But it was more than that, and Blake was not to know how she understood the Harris fear and hatred of those people. She may not have had the sharp eyes of a feline, but she just couldn't see this flaw and the link to them. Sorry for worrying you guys. Ruby apologized, rubbing the back of her head and using up the hair that her sister had tried to reorder. I just couldn't let them kill that man. She glanced over at the would-be victim as he talked to a couple of huntsmen. I couldn't let that happen a second time. The older girls were silent for a moment as her words settled with each of them. Death was something that none of them would want to see, let alone twice. It's just sad that today didn't go as planned for us, the Snapper sighed, lamenting her careful laying plan, which had gone awry. I was really looking forward to team bonding, not that it was going well in the first place. The older girls, exhausted, guilty looks, realized that that had been their fault even before the White Fang attacked, and the day went to heck and handbasket. Well, the day is not over, Weiss began with a certain caution, and my curiosity on burgers might have been piqued, she admitted, and drifting towards her now cavernous stomach. Ruby looked up in surprise at her partner's words. Could it be? Yeah, and maybe afterwards you can show me that book you recommended, Yang added. Only if you take me for a spin on your bike, Blake smirked, playing along. Her name's Bumblebee, Yang beamed. This was it. This was what she had hoped for. It was small, but it was a start. A real start to becoming a real team. Just a little longer, Ruby thought happily. Then a thought crossed her mind. How did you guys know where to find me anyways? Ruby asked. Tracker in your scroll, Blake answered before Yang could stop her. What? Ruby shouted in shock, while whipping out the device and scouring it for signs of tampering. Blake! Yang hissed. Yang, you knew about this? Ruby hollered, glaring at the older girl. Yang laughed nervously as she took a few steps back, but was not able to save her as a red blur leaped at her, enticing a tussle in the middle of the street. I have a feeling this is going to be a normal scene for us. Enthusiasm waning slightly, Blake put the anticipation aside for the moment and enjoyed the interaction with the detachment of a remote viewer. Adults. We sighed, head sinking into her hand. Clarity. There you are. The demoralized members of Team 7 paused briefly in their approach to see if they couldn't glean the exact shade of red glowing from behind Shiva's mask. The hue would determine how they should handle the tripolar captain. We did signal you that we were cutting comms. Rather, most of Kitsune's team was so cautious, but Aro had no such computation and wandered blinkly to the hornet's nest. Besides, I doubt we slowed you down much. From the looks of things, your team needs a bit more time to recover. In contrast to Naruto's mortally wounded team, Neela's was just plain begriddled, wrung out, and hung up wet. None of their masks could be considered a shade of white anymore, and all were sporting at least a few bumps and bruises, in addition to a weirdly hangdog air above them. No thanks to you, lazy fucks. All except for Lonan, who was barely recognizable as a person, but continued to be as volatile as her persona. Though cuts littered her scrawny body, she could barely keep still under the ministrations of Uma Ferrer. Now that he had a mask off, it was a testament to his skill. as well as her hot-headedness that he could even see what she was doing behind all that blood. And try to be more careful with those meaty hands of yours, farm boy, that you can even feel anything. Ferrer grumbled as he wiped off some more grime with the spade-covering rag and finished stitching a lone gash on her arm with a peak nod and a snip. Even if you weren't hopped up on painkillers, I doubt any of your nerve endings are still functioning. Plancha mia. There was more blood on the petite assassin than anyone could have thought she'd had in her twig-like body, but that didn't preclude the pearly white grin from splitting through the crimson. I'll bet that little cunt wishes she couldn't feel anything after I got through with her. Chuckling darkly, Lonan fished something out of her shredded trousers and rattled them in her hands for the rest to see. Looks like I got the last laugh. And smile, bitch. Even as a medic, Namekuji balked at the sight of loose teeth in the wasp's palm. Suzubachi, you know the rules about trophies. It seemed if Team 7 wasn't sure before, now they knew Nila was mad even with the calm fury turned away from them. Aw, come on, Captain. It's just a little joke. Lona, sweetly, too sweetly, cocking her head and smiling behind the mask which showed but one face of an all-inclusive god. If you don't want those to be replacements, I suggest you get rid of them. Fine. That aside, the 3 out of 4 on Team 7 flinched as the stereotypical team captain turned to them. It's good to see you 4 return safely. That's because it means more paperwork if we kicked it. Taka grumbled, leaning against the same wall as Kuma, but hardly noticing she was even there. Well, there is that, Illa smirked. We're already going to be in enough trouble for failing as it is. It would be a permanent blight in our records if we misplaced our cute little Kohai as well. Wait, why the hell would we get in trouble? Ferrer blurted out before any on Team 7 could comment. Because, dumbass, we were the ones calling the shots. The masks did not hide their surprises, as it was Lonan who came to their defense begrudgingly, not blaming her, but Nilla was the one who sent the training hound after the target while we were busy with our heads up our asses. I knew we should have handled things ourselves. And then where would we be? The captain asked rhetorically as she glanced behind her to see how her fellow leader reacted to the trained dog's comment. Like it or not, things just didn't play out in our favor today. I think we should just be glad that things didn't turn into a total snafu. Right, Itachi? Materializing from the shadows, the older assassin joined her cabal and laid a soft hand on Kitsun's shoulder. All the Plaza cameras have been neutralized, and I am all but certain the authorities will be chasing ghosts until all the real evidence has disappeared. Thanks for the help with that, Kuma. The lanky girl nodded, solemnly causing Sasuke to stimulatively notice her next to him for the first time. Then we're done here. A glance around showed allied leader a quick nod from Itachi, a grunt from Ferrer and Lonan, trotting to her feet with the help of her Tetsubo as a cane. Awesome. Let's get a move on. When we get back, ice cream sundaes in the mess. On me. Not that it isn't appreciated. Namikuji faced hesitant to provoke the clearly unstable woman, but what are we celebrating? As near as any of them could tell, there was nothing good that came out of that day worth mentioning. Oh, we're not! Somehow slipping both the pink-haired girl and her own grumbling tomboy onto her arms at the same time, Nila held up a finger with another arm to make her point. But don't you think we could really use one? As a medic, Sakura found it hard to argue. Make it a beer float and you got yourself a deal. Don't you mean a root beer float? Nope, she proclaimed, popping the P. You know, I might have misjudged you, Pinky. Naruto, As the other assassins trailed after the increasingly disturbing conversation, Itachi caught the defamed captain standing stock still with his clenched fist slowly leaking blood onto the tilted room. Are you alright? The young assassin didn't acknowledge his mentor, continuing to stare after the missable interactions of the others with the quiver racking his entire body. With his hand still on the unsleeved shoulder, Itachi gave a squeeze which appeared to reset whatever thoughts had frozen behind Kitsune's unfeeling black mask. Taicho? Naruto, Itachi repeated. Are you sure you're alright? Cocking his head over so fox-like. Never would Itachi admit it, but the sights and shivers down his spine. Of course, why wouldn't I be? Clarity. Ruby walked in silence as she listened to her team interact with one another, a completely different feeling than earlier in the day when they had set out on their adventure. This was what she had wanted. Her team together like this. There was still a certain distance between them, but if that was to be expected, a small price to pay. Slowly her thoughts shifted through the day until something fully set in with her. I did it, Ruby whispered to herself in disbelief, and she couldn't help the smile that blossomed across her face in the light of this fact. She had protected someone successfully, she had beat him, but her thoughts shifted to their two encounters. He won last time, and once was too much. Little was she to know of the similar thoughts being mirrored on the other side of the city. They each had one loss and one win. Somehow they both knew that they would meet each other again. It was inevitably more than statistics could prove, more than something as simplistic as fate could predict. It was the desire and determination in both which ignited at the same time and unwittingly guided their actions to make it true. Next time we meet, they both thought, I'll stop him. I'll kill her. End of chapter 5.